morning to everybody. Here we are with another PBL Talks. And today we have the great pleasure to have with us Professor Allison Christians. She's a full professor at McGill University in Montreal, in Canada. Of course, she deals with tax law, and so it's really a pleasure to have you here for all of us. And during our last talks, we had talked a lot about the fiscal measures that taken by the individual countries, and also we talk about how maybe heavy losses could be managed both at the domestic level and international level. But I think there is another topic that we can address now, and we would like to broaden a little bit our analysis. And so this pandemic could also lead to an excess of profits in some kind of industries. So what do you think, Allison, could be an appropriate response from a tax point of view by countries that are involved in this pandemic?
Well, thank you, Natalia. It's just a pleasure to be with you and doing this this podcast, webcast, videocast, whatever you'd like to call it, cast. So an excess profits tax be in certain industries. So certain industries are not only going to survive the pandemic, but they're going to thrive. And then the question is, well, should you just be always looking for the deepest pockets when you're trying to tax? Like, is that a thing that governments should do today? You should just look for who's got money. And I don't think that's the answer, right? So an excess profits tax isn't actually doing that, right? It's not saying, well, who's got some money and let me get it. It's saying, okay, well, something's going on with the market. There's a structural problem with the market. It's failing. There's a massive healthcare crisis. It's just turning everything upside down. Everything is just topsy-turvy. And all of a sudden, some firms have been thrust into the spotlight and stand to make a lot of money off of the brokenness of the market. What we're looking at is, well, which companies are being unduly advantaged by a broken market? And that's where an excess profits tax really situates itself, right? There's a problem that's market-wide. The tax needs to respond to that while the market's in crisis. And then afterwards, it will normally fall away. And that's what we've seen in excess profits taxes in the past. So if you want, I can talk you through the excess profits tax that I'm proposing, which is a global excess profits tax rather than a domestic one.
Yeah, of course, very interesting.
Okay, so there's a little bit of technical detail. Bear with me as I walk through this, but here's the idea. So when you look at the OECD's digitalization of the economy program, you can see that what governments are trying to solve are structural problems that have cropped up as the economy has shifted, but the tax rules stayed the same. The digitalization program in Pillar 1 using terms like residual and non-residual, or routine and non-routine profits. So this is kind of a conceptually interesting idea. One that, by the way, has no economically correct answer. That is, when you look at a multinational, to what inputs can we attribute its profit-making potential? You have a whole host of things that could be contributing to the bottom line profit. And they include management functions and risk functions and innovation and technology and a whole host of things. But one of the things that certainly is important but is hard to articulate what it contributes is the market. The availability of the customer to the producer of a good or a service. Because right now we think, we don't want to say this too clearly, but we think too much profit is being attributed to, hard to value intangibles, which are conveniently located in places that don't tax those things. And not enough value is being attributed to other things, which we think contribute to the bottom line profits. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to draw a line. We're going to draw a line in multinational profit calculation between what we think is sort of normal profits and what we think is extra profits. And this extra profits, we're going to subdivide those extra profits, and we're going to take a little bit out and we're going to sprinkle it across countries that right now think they're not getting enough of multinational profits. So the same structure could be used for an excess profits tax. That is, what is an excess profits tax doing? It's saying, okay, if you look at a multinational, it's earning a bunch of profit. The sources of its profit are myriad and interconnected, and they include innovation and being in the right place in the right timing, having a product that people need at the time they need it. But when an economic crisis, market-wide crisis hits, then some portion of the profit are attributable to that. And it's just the luck of the draw that you happen to be in the right place at the right time, but you didn't do anything necessarily to produce these extra excess profits. So the same idea, draw a line. Draw a line between normal, this is what we would think you would get no matter what the market was doing in terms of crisis, and super normal or extra or, excess, the language of excess, and in the OECD language, the language of residual, these extra profits, we're going to take a look at those and say, okay, maybe we need to think structurally about what those profits are really attributable to. And this can make people uncomfortable, right? Because the argument is there's a sort of perfect market. And in a perfect market, a multinational has normal profits from things everybody can do and supernormal or residual profits from the thing this firm can do that other firms, its competitors, can't do. And what I'm suggesting is that even in a normal market, some portion of those residual profits might actually not be the product of the innovative firm or business strategy, but might actually be attributable to something more structural, which is the market as a whole. So the excess profits tax is copying that language, pulling those ideas out of Pillar 1, drawing the line between normal and supernormal and saying these are the same, this is the same idea as the OECD is doing with routine and non-routine.
Yes, indeed. I really like, the idea of our talks is that one. So maybe to figure out also new way of taxation, of new approach among the different states. We have Professor Valistenda speaking about a European tax. We had also Dalí Buzzara speaking about the new splitting of the profits of individuals. We discuss about losses, how to split losses. We discuss about if Pillar 1 is still the right one to be applied in such a new world. So we really like. We want to go deep in your idea. It's important.
From my perspective, the way the OECD has put together this digitalization program, Pillar 1 is about allocation. You take the pie, you recut it, and then you take some slices that you used to give to one country and you give them to another. So it's a pure allocation exercise. And Pillar 2 is a tax floor, and it's sort of making sure that whichever country you give those pieces of pie to, each one is going to be able to tax it. And if they choose not to, then another can come in as a substitute. So then I think Pillar 3, that's where I would put the gap tax. It would be Pillar 3. It would be, okay, we reallocated according to Pillar 1. We've got this tax and backup tax structure, Pillar 2. What we need now is a surtax. We need an ability to tax profits that go above a certain threshold. And the threshold is referencing back to the numbers and the data and the analysis that's coming out of Pillar 1. And it's using the concept of residual and routine profits as a starting place. And so in the paper, my co-author and I talk about, well, if you look at the OECD's analytical study of the likely implementation of Pillar 1, what would happen to countries? They look at the likely percentage difference of tax revenue, right? But in that study, they also make estimates about how much they think they're redistributing, like which part of that pie is being cut a different way and spread around. And they give some percentages there. And then we see that outside of the OECD, you have independent researchers estimating, well, how much do they think would be subject to this redistribution in Pillar 1? KPMG study is saying there is actually a pretty uniform, normal profit range across industries and across countries, and you could have some variation. There's a pretty standard range though, and then there's some external researchers, and they've also come up with some numbers. And what they've said is this: based on what the OECD is showing us, and based on what we can glean from country by country reporting to the extent it's available, the normal profit of a multinational is about 8% on average, and the residual profit is about 14% on average. So Pillar 1 would reorganize the profit of a multinational accordingly, and Pillar 3 would say, okay, once you're above that, 22%, 8 and 14, once you're above that, then you're into surtax area, then you're into excess profits territory, and we need to be thinking about whether a surtax should apply to that amount of profit above that band. So it's mixing those pieces together. It's separate from Pillar 1, but it's built on the same idea, or it needs Pillar 1 in order to have the structure upon which to build the surtax element. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Allison. I was also wondering which kind of instruments or tools maybe do you think are available to apply this kind of surtax on excess profits at a global level, if you think that we still have the knowledge to do that or not?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So part of the reason it's hard to answer this question is because a lot of the knowledge that we need, I think, exists but is not available to me as an external researcher. So I'm thinking about the CBCR data. So the OECD is a repository for all those CBCR reports, and only multinational themselves would know what it is that's in those reports. But since we've been collecting those reports since I think 2016 or 2017, we have a few years of CBCR data, and that is a repository of information about normal profits, residual profits, excess profits, routine profits, whatever you want to call these things. That is a database that if we could use it for study, we might be able to get better at understanding when we're dealing with an excess profit situation. So you could sort of see two ways to use it, right? One tool would be, okay, we just use the CBCR data to try to figure out what was a normal return, or what was the return that we saw, average return, before COVID-19. That gives us a baseline, and then any company that's going wildly above that, we can start talking about push them over to Pillar 3 and start thinking about a surtax. Or you could use it on a company by company basis, where you could say each company would look at its own CBC reporting over the period 3 years or 2 or 3 years, depending on how long they've been reporting. And if they themselves have an excess profit, then they would be subject to Pillar 3. But if they didn't, they would just not be in this regime at all. So you could do this income averaging, you could set a baseline for everybody, you could set a rate for everybody. The question is, who's going to do that? Right? So again, this is just information I don't have, right? Because it's proprietary or confidential or both. That is, when a country wants to know what's in the CBCR documentation, if they're at the top of the chain, it's easy. They can pull everything from the bottom up and they can do their analysis. It's as close to consolidated reporting as we have. So I think it would be easy for a country at the top of a chain, a multinational chain, to do an analysis and try to figure out what the excess profit rate looks like. And then at that point, you could then dole it out the way that we do, either according to the current transfer pricing regime or in a digitalization world where we have the Pillar 1 in place, according to this new allocation. And then each country could just add the surtax. I mean, it's just simple additional tax, right? That's not too difficult. But if you're lower down on the chain, it's not obvious to me how you do that, right? I don't know the answer to this. If you're in a country that's lower down the chain and all the countries above you choose not to give you the information, can you still consolidate effectively well enough to be able to understand whether the firm you're dealing with has excess profits? And that's just a technical question, and I think has to be worked out. And I think that information is at the OECD. But it's confidential. So, either we have to not make it non-confidential to some extent, or you can have a different regime, which is, you give researchers access to the data to study it, not to use it, not for audit, not for enforcement, but to study the data for policy reasons. This is standard in a lot of countries where you can get taxpayer information for, to undertake policy analysis. That's what should be happening at the OECD, I think, with CBCR. That would give us information, the data, to be able to say, either we've got an across-the-board average profit expectation and anything above that just looks like excess profit in a COVID-19 economy, or you can do firm by firm and say, forget about averages on this specific firm is doing better under COVID-19 than the trajectory would have predicted. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Let me raise one more question. Sorry, but it's really interesting speaking with you and speaking about this item. I would like to move on the behavior of the states. So we discussed during our talk with Professor Zhang from China and Professor Danon from Switzerland that they think that the states shall change their approach to the international context. So they probably change their behavior in negotiating with the other states or treaties, or even a proposal of a taxation on the surtax profits. What do you think about this?
Will countries be more likely to take unilateral measures than multilateral after COVID-19? And I think I think that's probably likely, right? In other words, I think the crisis has sort of set back the work in progress. So we have a work program, we kind of had things firing on all cylinders. We had deadlines for when the consensus on the digital economy was going to be brought to the inclusive framework. We kind of had a sense of how this was all going to work, and then everything paused. And we all had to divert our attention very quickly to, we need to spend money right now. We need to push money out to people. We need to deal with this crisis right now. We just are not thinking long-term about the policy of anything right now. We're in spending mode right now. And now when we come on the other side of that, for a while there, it felt like, oh, it's too bad being an international tax expert, because nobody cares about tax right now. They just care about spending. But we all knew that at the end of this, at some end that's coming, people will start caring about tax again. And very quickly, it'll be clear that governments have got to figure out a way to start managing all of the debts that they've piled up, or all the spending that they've piled up. And so they're going to start looking basically everywhere you can look for tax. And I think that means they're going to look at unilateral measures. Like, I think we're going to see more digital taxes. We're going to see possibly some excess profits tax, surtaxes, and any kind of any instrument you can find, maybe more VAT, maybe more consumption taxes, excise taxes of any kind, right? But eventually you think that is not sustainable, right? That you can't have, taxpayers just cannot manage 70 new taxes from 70 different countries, none of which coordinate with each other. That just is not going to work for anybody. It's not going to work for multinationals. It's not going to work for governments, because they're all going to be, so mired in the technical of that. So ultimately, I think that will lead to the next round of multilateralism. So I think in the short term, the answer is we're going to see more unilateral, for sure. I think we're already seeing it. Digital services taxes and so on, we'll see more of those, I think, because we have a pattern, we have a playbook now. Everybody can just go to France's structure or Spain's structure or whoever, and then just pick that out and apply it and try that. We're going to try to tax these digital firms. We're going to try this, we're going to try that, but really we actually need to cooperate, at least at the level of information, possibly at the level of coordination, administration, assistance in collection, these kind of things. So short term, I think more unilateral, but the more unilateral we get, the more I think calls for multilateralism will re-emerge and will start again.
Yeah, it's really, it's challenging. I think it's a challenging topic. So thank you very much, Allison. So probably the solution, regarding this challenging idea, this global surtax could be like a pillar 3 issued by OECD, and making, I mean, countries more reactive to this topic.
Well, we'll see. I mean, yeah, I think the OECD has a lot going on right now, and there's a lot of technical detail that still has to be worked out. But I think there's a power in an idea, and the OECD has built the structure for it, and the vocabulary of tax is changing through that digitalization project. And I think that gives momentum going forward.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also a topic, I mean, really connected to transfer pricing issues, to exchange of information issues. So there is also, I mean, the background that they are probably also now addressing as the situation is asking for solution, for answers. So, Allison, thank you very much for explaining us, I mean, your idea. It's very interesting idea, and we hope we will have the chance to talk about that in person soon. So thank you very much.
I would like it too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.